Many people struggle with the concept of fast days. What does it mean to fast? Why fast? Why should we suffer? And really to consider the concept of suffering is quite an abrasive reality. You know, people feel very anxious about fast days. They find it horrendous, you know, to consider fasting, not eating, not getting your coffee if you're used to having your coffee. What's the point of all of these things? And really what we miss out on is the essence of the day. So this class, I hope, is not going to be a complex class, but I also hope it's going to be a shortish class. I don't want it to go on for too long, but I want to get into the essence, try and understand a few very deep sources, quite Kabbalistic sources, in trying to understand what this day represents and how we can really galvanize the deep energy of Tisha B'Av. As we know, the Mashiach is said to be born on Tisha B'Av itself. Out of all days, why would Mashiach be born on Tisha B'Av? Which means there's an element of redemption deep within the day. There's an element of discovery deep within the day. There's something very powerful, very meaningful, very spiritual in the day of Tisha B'Av. To the extent we don't say Tachanun. We don't say Tachanun even on the Shabbos. We don't say Tzidkoscha prior to Tisha B'Av. So what is it that is so powerful about this day? So I want to share with you a very, very strange Gemara. Okay, many of you will have never heard of this Gemara, but I'll read it to you anyway. The Gemara speaks about, and this is brought in the name of, this is brought by Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel. Nice name, that name, Shmuel. Okay, so he says the following. He says the Romans have a custom or a festival which would take place once every 70 years. It says that they would place a healthy man and ride him on the lame man. And the lame man was dressed in the attire, the healthy man was dressed in the attire, the lame man was dressed in the attire of Adam. On his head is placed the scalp of Rabbi Yishmael, and on his neck are hung pieces of fine gold to the weight of 4 zuzim. Already quite strange, no? It's taking place here. What's going on? Okay, so again, the Romans every 70 years would have a festival. They would take a lame man, dress him in the garments of Adam, and place on him a scalp of Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yishmael was the Kohen Gadol. He was said to be extremely beautiful. And when he was executed, the empress ordered his head to be essentially skinned, and she would keep his face to look at. And they would wear, or they would place this mask, so to speak, on this lame man, and they would ride an able-bodied man on top of this lame man, and they would pronounce and say, "Look at this one. This is the imposter. This lame person. He's the imposter. We are the victors." That's what they would say every 70 years. Okay. What a strange festivity. What a strange thing to even consider. So let's try and understand the relevance of this festivity. What are they trying to really aim at? What are they trying to catalyze in terms of their proclamation? So who do you think this lame man represents? Okay, I want you to stay focused, okay, because there's a few elements that we need to piece together and try and understand. The rabbis tell us that the lame man represents Yaakov. Yaakov, we know Jacob had a fight with Esau, and Jacob walked away from that fight, it says, being maimed in his thigh. Okay, what does that fight represent? And we know Rome came from who? Came from Esau. So now it's almost that there's a reliving of this fight where Jacob fighting with the angel of Esau okay, fights with this angel and walks away with a lame leg. More specifically, we know he was struck in what we call the sciatic nerve. What's the relevance of the sciatic nerve? Okay, stay with me. The Romans now have a festival every 70 years where they take this lame man, which is meant to represent Jacob, and they dress him up as a Jew. They put the Kohen Gadol's face on him. They dress him up in the garment of Adam, which was said or purported to attract animals. There was something very, very spiritual and lofty about this garment. And then they would ride someone on top of him, saying, the person that is the able-bodied one, he's the victor. This is the imposter, this lame man. A reference to Jacob and Esau. So essentially what this represents is the story of our lives. Okay, the story of our lives. Every individual inside of them has both of these characters. We have a Jacob inside of us, and we have an Esau inside of us. The Jacob we know and we speak often about is the humility inside of us. The Jacob is the connection, the truth, the state of deep spiritual being and essence. And Esau comes from the word asui. Asui means to be made, a state of redness, a state of externality, a state of physicality, a state of Rome, a state of the ego. That's what asui means. That's what Esau stood for. And essentially the fight between Jacob and Esau was a fight of supremacy. What type of mentality, ideology does a person focus into in their lives to reach happiness? Is it the ideology of Jacob, or is it the ideology of Esau? And this is essentially what this was a fight about. And who won at the end of the day? Jacob. Jacob won. Esau could not affront him. He could not, take over him. Jacob won. But what Esau was able to do is he was able to maim him. He was able to create a facade in Jacob that looked not so attractive. It looked a little bit lame, pardon the pun. Now, what is extremely important to understand is the following. When they fought, Esau and Jacob, when they fought, it says that v'yavak ish imoy, that a man fought with him. And the word avak comes from the word dust. Okay, this is extremely important from a Kabbalistic perspective. Why is it so important? Because we are told that the dust was elevated until it covered the throne of Hashem. It says it reached the throne of Hashem. Now, what this symbolizes is the following. In our lives, we sometimes have circumstances where there is dust. There is a fight with the Esau inside of us. And the way that Esau fights us is only through one method. And that is creating dust that will cover our eyes from seeing our essence. What is our essence? It's the throne of Hashem. The dust covered the throne through their fighting. And thus, we go through life potentially following the pathway of Esau, feeling an emptiness inside of us, feeling gewalt. What's happened to me? Where is life gone? Why do I feel so empty? And we look around and we say, what is life about? And it's just covered with dust. We can't see the throne of Hashem. We can't see it. But deep inside, there's an element of Jacob inside every single one of us. There's an element of Jacob. So now that is part one. That is part one. And essentially, there are only going to be 2 parts. So don't worry. It's not like there's 10 or 17 parts. Only 2 parts. That's part one that I want you to just park there, have that clear what we spoke about. And that's really just an explanation around this festivity that the Romans would do historically every 70 years. They were essentially saying, you Jewish people who stand for a specific way of life, which is internality, humility, connection. That's not our ideal. We don't stand for that. And we'll prove it to you. We are the victors. We will ride on top of you, Yishmael. This was Yishmael, the Kohen Gadol. We will ride on top of you, the lame man, Jacob. We are better than you. Our way of life is supreme. That's part one. Okay. Any questions so far about this part? We can flesh it out a little bit more. There's obviously endless amounts that we can chew on, but anything that a person has, anyone here of any significant pressing need to clarify. All right, part 2. The Kabbalists tell us that we know there's 365 days in the year. You don't need a Kabbalist to tell you that. I'm sure you knew that without a Kabbalist, but this is where the Kabbalists get involved, okay? 365 days in the year. Now, those 365 days also correspond to the 365 negative commandments. Mitzvahs lo saseh. There's 365 negative commandments. Out of the 613, 365 are prohibitions. Now, just to add the third one in here, there are 365 sinews within a human body. Okay? Now, if we were to take the day of Tisha B'Av, if we were to take the destruction of the temple, which sinew would it correlate to? And which negative prohibition, mitzvahs lo saseh, would it correlate to? Okay? Out of the 365 days that Tisha B'Av falls out on one of them, which sinew would be of relevance and which mitzvahs lo saseh, negative commandments? So listen to what the rabbis say. They say, yeah, anyone want to add here? Ivan, you got something there? No. Gracias.
I wanted to ask whether it does not correlate to the sciatic nerves.
Excellent. Thank you, Professor Gracias. Exactly. So the Kabbalists tell us that the day of Tisha B'Av correlates to the sciatic nerve, okay, as a sinew. And it also correlates to the prohibition of sinas chinam, of baseless hatred, okay? Negativity, hatred, animosity, those emotions, okay? Those emotions of pain. So that's part 2, okay? These 3, there's a pattern here. Tisha B'Av, the sinew, which is the sciatic nerve, and the prohibition of, you would think it's of not eating the sciatic nerve, but it's the prohibition of baseless hatred, okay? That's part 2. Let's try and mix these together and try and understand what they represent and what they can teach us about the day of Tisha B'Av. We're told that when the temple was destroyed, essentially, it was just the outer structure that was destroyed. Already the inner structure of the temple had been destroyed. Already the inner structure had been completely eliminated. And we know that the essence of the temple was destroyed because of the attribute of sinas chinam, the attribute of baseless hatred. Now, what is baseless hatred? Baseless hatred is something that pervades through our lives in a number of frameworks. We spoke a little bit about it today. But it's a hatred towards oneself. It's a hatred towards people. It's a hatred towards God. It's a hatred towards one's circumstances. And we can come up with reasons. We can come up with reasons. But essentially, if you define or you evaluate hatred, there's never a reason to actually feel that hate to the extent that it erodes you as a person. Why should it erode you internally? But there's a baseless hatred that comes out, a hatred for the self, for others, for life in general. Now, what we understand is that is the deep pain that people feel in life. That's the real korban. If we think about the pain and suffering that we mourn in our lives, that is connected obviously to the destruction of the temple, but that's what we're mourning. We're mourning the pain and suffering that we have in our existence, that we don't feel good enough, that we don't feel, that life is catering to us, that we don't feel happy to live. That's the hatred. That's the baseless hatred that we speak about. But all of this stems from one specific thing, and that is the internality. That is what Jacob represents. That is the covering over of the throne of Hashem. So essentially, if we are to understand the topic or the title of this class, it's rebuilding our inner temples. And rebuilding our inner temples, yes, we mourn the destruction of an external temple, an infrastructure that represented our internal temples. But the whole day is about tapping into our essence. And the whole day is about stripping the externalities of Esav, of Rome, which is focused on gluttony, on food, on drink, on pampering, on external appearance. We don't wash ourselves. We don't wear comfortable shoes. All of these elements, for one day, we strip away those externalities to say, how much have we become reliant on the external elements of our lives? And where has our internality, our inner temple, our Jacob, our throne, and our clarity of sight, where's it disappeared to? Because if we don't cater to that first, if we don't bolster that first, if we don't fill up that essence, then that animosity that exists around us, that hatred that exists around us, that pain that exists around us cannot subside. So essentially, this is the teaching of Tisha B'Av. So when a person asks you and you ask yourself, what is the point of this day? Why do I have to sit there and bemoan the destruction of a building, of a temple that we know what it represented and we know what it stood for, but I feel so disconnected? Essentially, you must say to yourself, what I am mourning is myself. I am mourning the loss and the death of my inner self. That is what I'm mourning. And I feel it in the pain that I feel in my life. I feel it in the hatred that I feel in my life. I feel it in the disconnected state and the darkness that I feel in my life. And the purpose of the day is essentially to build up that inner temple, to build up our sensitivity, to build up our inner world, to build up our Jacob. And that's the whole reality of the day, okay? So this is how we've tied in these concepts to just tie it back to, very briefly, that second part that we spoke about. Those three elements. We said the day of Tisha B'Av correlates to the sciatic nerve, which correlates to sinas chinam, baseless hatred. So what we understood was the following. The day of Tisha B'Av correlates to the sciatic nerve. The sciatic nerve is our inner self. It is our inner being. That's what it represents, the Jacob inside of us. And that was ripped out. So we tap into that. But when we don't have that sciatic nerve, then it impacts us as if it's a Tisha B'Av, which then it impacts us as the baseless hatred, the sinas chinam that exists in our lives. And that's why these three elements all correlate together. They all come together. And they're all part and parcel of the same thing. So that's really, hopefully, something that we can consider when we come into this day. It's a very personal day. Yes, it's a macro day as well, where we mourn as a nation for the destruction and for that internality that's been lost and how it's affected us as a nation. But it's also an extremely personal day that we cry to Hashem with really, really, really deep tears to say, Hashem, we want to come back to you. We want our inner selves to be rebuilt. We want to have the infrastructure internally that nothing outside of us can affect us in such a negative way, that we aren't shifted or changed by any of our circumstances, because essentially we are always there. Our inner self is always there. So it should be a brocha, my dear friends. This Tisha B'Av should be a true birthing of Mashiach, internally and externally, which should see a rebuilding of our temples, our inner and external temples. And it should be a time of deep meaning and connection and relevance to our experience of the day. And God willing, it should be a day, as we know, when Mashiach comes, it will be a festival, a day of celebration. That in fact, from Shiva Sabbat Tammuz, that will be the first day of the festival. And Chol HaMoed, all the way until then, will be a Chol HaMoed, until the final day of Tisha B'Av, which is the final day, the Atzeres, which is the final day of festivity, because we will be celebrating the sobering and the rehabilitation of our inner selves through those experiences. So let's open up for any potential questions. It was a little bit more intricate. I think this type of shir a little bit more to hold, 2 pieces or 2 parts, and each part was quite involved. So if you're able to get anything out of it, kol hakavod. If not, just for being able to see all of your faces, that is fantastic. It was also very, very wonderful. Even to see Benji there, what a treat. That is some serious inspiration there. That is super inspiration. So let's just open up if there's anyone who has a question about what we've just learned. Okay, Chevra, shall be with Brocha. I've sent out the